Neil McLean from MWH. First question is, could we ever get too much of Australia Road? No, you don't need to answer that. Was it Graham that spoke of the tree scheme, the adopted tree scheme? And it brings me to my question of community engagement and maintenance. And I wonder if Graham, perhaps in particular, and everyone else, has any thoughts on the prospect of encouraging community engagement to reduce long-term maintenance by whoever should be doing it.
Yeah, I think the Adopt a Tree scheme is obviously, the idea of it came from the Friends group anyway, and as I said, I think that whole idea could extend to maintenance in other areas, so not just for trees, but for the wetlands themselves in terms of litter picking, because that's one of the big things, I think, for maintenance. Certainly when we go to parks with these ideas for wetlands, I think they're a bit unhappy with us in a way. They should be a bit happy with us, but they sort of see it as we're basically giving them a maintenance headache into the future.
So making people come to the park.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think these wetlands are susceptible to collecting litter as well. And I think having a friends group that's receptive early on and gets more engaged, they'll take ownership of it, and hopefully that sort of maintenance issue will be looked after by the public, and they're given more incentive to do it if they've got more attachment to the scheme. So, yeah, and I think there's other elements of maintenance, aren't there? Yeah.
So for both those schemes, we've prepared a management plan and got our parks operations team to cost them up. And actually, there is a small increase in maintenance costs, but it's not huge because at the moment, they do a lot of very frequent sort of grass cutting and stuff like that. But in the future, the maintenance in terms of vegetation management and so on will be less frequent, but perhaps more intensive when it does go on. But overall, there's not a huge increase in costs. And there's also massive opportunities to get locals involved, and they are interested. There's a big appetite for this kind of thing. If it's an interesting space, then people, like people have allotments, and like often people don't have their own garden. Sometimes maybe they want to do something that's more communal, rather than just doing it on their own. So, like I say, we can't really, speak too much about it at the moment because we're only just building these schemes, but we're certainly hopeful that we'll be able to get a continued community involvement in that aspect of it.
With regards to the Kenmont Garden Scheme, one of the main reasons for doing the community planting event was to give that ownership, and certainly the Residents Association have put forward the idea of maintaining it. They see a benefit in it. I think because they're located up in the north of the borough, and I think there's probably pockets all around the country where they feel possibly neglected, they don't quite see as much litter collection or what have you. They see the benefit of actually undertaking this work themselves and keeping it, I think we spoke earlier actually in the next door with regards to the broken window effect. The idea that if you leave litter in a certain area, well, people will start adding to that litter, whereas you keep it clean, people feel inclined not to leave their litter there. So there's that aspect. And with regards to maintenance, I think we have to ensure that we try and minimise the need for maintenance and make it as passive as possible. And so you plant plants which don't need constant care and attention, that actually maintain themselves in that regard. But I think there's a huge place for community involvement. We all see our revenue streams dwindling and dwindling, and so we need to try and maintain them, through utilising public in that regard.
I'd just say on that, I think as far as possible, it's absolutely essential to try and involve residents in taking part in the maintenance where you can. But I think one of the things that we've been aware of throughout this project and other projects we've delivered is that it can be quite difficult to always rely on residents to do things. Particularly, people can move away, people can pass away, and that can change. And so, unless it's kind of formalised in terms of a management plan, I guess you try and keep it to things that are fairly manageable and fairly obvious through things like the food growing type areas within the project. I think, you know, one of the aspirations that we've got for the LIFE programme is to work very closely with Quadrant, who are the maintenance team who currently maintain it, and the residents to look at where there might be opportunities through the creation of a management plan to try and formalise those spaces that are being looked after by residents and those which will continue to be looked after by the maintenance contractor.
Hi, Paul Schaffer from Syria. Before, we had a meeting earlier on in the day talking about how do we actually try and mainstream SUDS, and I'd be interested to know, in all of your discussions, how do you talk about SUDS? SUDS as a term doesn't necessarily invoke positive, warm, fuzzy feelings, but I'm just wondering what type of language, what type of kind of vision do you present to the communities about sustainable drainage?
I think it's difficult to start off with SUDS, to be honest. I think the experience from our project was we started talking to people about issues they had in the buildings, in the landscape. And then through that process, you kind of start engaging with them, you start talking about some of the things you might do to rectify those problems, but also they can provide these other benefits, and then you can start getting into a conversation. I still think there's a good number of people who, you know, they're happy that we've relayed the tarmac path as much as they are, you know, with the greenery or the changes we've done there in terms of the SUDS schemes. But certainly in all the estates we've worked on, I think a good number of people have come along with us over 2.5 years, you know. And it was nice when you were there at the event, like I mentioned, there's a couple of people now who you know, in a public environment could start to talk about why those measures were happening on their estate, and that can and should only grow.
Yeah, I was just going to say the word SUD seems to be so embedded now that we do generally use it, but we try and obviously explain to people what it means. And I think some aspects are simple, you know, like just depaving and talking about mimicking natural drainage characteristics like infiltration and so on. But it does require telling a bit of the story, you know, starting off with the problems and why those problems are caused and how we can sort of address them. But yeah, we still haven't got a better term than SUD that we've come up with.
When I actually do use the term SUDS internally, and the reason being that I think everyone internally sees it as, I'll tick. I can tick that box off. I've put SUDS in there, and I know that, you know, we have a political driver basically. You know, our cabinet member wants to see more SUDS projects. So if they can put forward a project and they can put the SUDS label on it, well, they get a tick. Externally, I think you need to explain it in terms of flooding, but also more amenity of benefit, because I think the flooding aspect is taken for granted. We should, as a council, be managing flooding. If we can provide amenity in the process, well, hey, we prefer that than a pipe. So that's how we kind of pushed on the amenity and biodiversity benefits.
Any other questions? Otherwise I shall... Oh, yes, there is. Good.
Hi, I'm Julia Scott from Central Beds Council. On Firs Farm wetlands, you've introduced open water, and I noticed that you said that there had been a fence put in, but you said it was temporary. I was wondering, first of all, how did you get over the concept of open water? We struggle a lot with open water bodies. However much we'd like to keep them open, they always end up fenced. And also, do you foresee there might be a problem with taking that fence away?
Hiya. Yeah, it was Pims Park Wetlands is the one where we've put the fence in temporarily because there's such a big level difference there between the original ground surface and the wetlands. There is already a large water body in that park. So if people are going to say, well, why have you put this wetlands here? Well, you know, 50 metres away there's a lake which has got vertical banks, in some places concrete banks, and the water is over 1 metre deep, whereas the wetlands, it's much shallower. And we've tried to implement, you know, good practice techniques to ensure that, you know, children can't just go charging down into the water or accidentally fall into it, that kind of thing. And so far, you know, that's been accepted. It hasn't really created any problems or concerns unduly. So, yeah. And yeah, and planting the slopes up as well, just to create kind of natural barriers. So it's, I guess, in the places where it is steepest, instead of having a fence, we'll plant vegetation that's kind of prickly, or like gorse, that kind of thing, that will kind of, you know, deter people from trying to get through it, hopefully.
Perhaps I should just add to that. I mean, probably as everybody's aware, that the new SUDS manual is coming out. Is it still due October, Paul? Yeah. It's still due in October. And clearly health and safety is an issue that has to be recognised and the concerns understood in terms of design. But clearly the manual gives very good guidance on design, which is very much about, as you said, gradients of slopes and planting. But also, Rossborough in particular have collaborated and looked at water management, and you should look at it as a sort of risk-based assessment now, and therefore that helps you to determine where risks are likely to occur and how you can overcome them, and if you're going to put in fencing, where you might put it, because that's absolutely critical, and the height that it might be. So, you know, I'm like you, always gone, oh my God, fencing, no, but because I think we've seen so many instances in the past where there's been horrible concrete channels with fences on top that are broken, which are clearly dangerous features, whereas in the main what we're designing is things that are as inherently safe as they can possibly be. But, you know, it is absolutely an issue, and it's one we have to address, I think, all the time in whatever it is that we're designing. Right. Any other questions? Otherwise, I'm going to ask one and put you on the spot. I think really because we've been talking very much about placemaking today, and I think it's been lovely for me to have all you guys talking about it, because I think so often we become so focused on what we're trying to deliver in terms of the outcome of what we're doing that it doesn't get opened up to discussion as much as it should. And clearly, you know, it's good to see that these schemes are all being promoted by a wide range of disciplines. But so how do we get this discussion about placemaking very much up the agenda in terms of the delivery of SUDS, whether it's new build or retrofit? Because actually, if we don't make these places into something that people are going to love, then they're not going to be valued, and then their long-term integrity becomes under threat. Cross-disciplinary, how do we get everybody within design teams to be promoting and thinking about placemaking in design of SUDS?
Well, I guess I'll take it first then. And everyone else wants to have it, don't they?
A nice easy one.
Thanks for that. Look, I guess I sort of touched on it briefly, is making sure that we're aware of the opportunities. So I think it's a case of actually talking to one another, and it sounds crazy, but talking to one another, you know, our colleagues, about potentials, because I think everyone's got a small pot of money to undertake their work, and actually that small pot of money can come together to make a larger pot of money and make a better project. And I think the sooner we bring all those pots of money together and to realise that actually we're all trying to do quite similar things, you know, whether it be air quality, whether it be the schools, you know, estates management, trying to upgrade the green spaces. You know, there's a whole multitude of projects in there, you know, local improvement projects as part of TfL's LIP programme. You know, all these pots of money together can actually make a better project. But I think what we need to do is actually have those conversations internally to make sure that we are all singing from the same hymn sheet, and we actually bring everything together to implement those larger placemaking. You're looking at me like I've completely gone off track.
No,
here.
no, I'm just imagining the day I'm going to hear the highways engineer saying, "We want to do an improvement scheme with SUDS, but how can we make it a great place?" That's what how do we get that?
Yeah. Ian, here you go.
Well, Enfield's one of the mini Holland boroughs, which means that we've got £33 million to spend on cycling improvements over the next 2 or 3 years. But actually trying to get my colleagues in the cycle team to build SUDS into their designs is a massive challenge. We've had a lot of success with it sounds silly, but we've got a road safety team, which is completely separate from cycling improvements. They're very keen on SUDS, but they're more talking about doing small build-outs and things like that, which aren't really, it's not so much about placemaking, but they've really taken up the kind of, you know, the mantle for SUDS, as it were, because they realise it's another way they can sell their schemes. I'm yet to kind of win that battle with the Mini Holland team. They're so focused on delivering and spending these millions and millions of pounds they've got to spend. They don't really want to kind of, you know, get their designs messed up by kind of, you know, small benefits like making them nicer places. But as they're going through a very rocky period with their consultation at the moment, I'm hoping that we can get them to have a rethink and maybe make their schemes a bit more friendly. Yeah. Pardon? Well, yeah, exactly. Get them involved.
Just thinking about the presentation that we had at GLA the other day from Philadelphia and the kind of scale of ambition they've got to deliver this kind of 500 to 1,000 interventions on a year as a planned programme for 5 or 10 years. And I think whenever I go to presentations, we see really great examples around the place, and it's just within highways, within housing now, within parks and open space, and it is just that kind of jump from these nice few examples to getting them within planned and cyclical kind of programmes of work, basically. You mentioned a few there. And then there's the other landowners as well, who maybe there are less good examples on industrial, commercial land, potentially private housing. In urban areas, there's large amounts of land use which there, and how do we engage with them? And how can we get a community response to some of these such issues and get people to start seeing across land uses what the possibilities are?
Yeah, I'll just echo what's been said, really, but I think it's about talking to colleagues internally and getting, we're obviously quite passionate about SUDS and placemaking, but if you can sort of emphasise that internally and get it across, then I think that makes a real difference, and it's really just about keep on fighting to do that, and not giving up, and showing examples as well. The more examples that become available, the more you can show, so yeah.
Okay, so any last questions from anybody? Yes. Suzanne, down the front, please.
Hi, thank you. Chris Davis from Elliott Wood. Given that all of you talk about the public being on board by the end of the project, and you're talking about retrofitting SUDS, do you think that, for instance, street SUDS retrofitting schemes should be designed to be future-proofed so that residents can come along and disconnect their downpipes and such schemes at a later date? And if so, how can you deal with the obvious cost challenges of that?
I think there's a role for building in some extra capacity to predict the change that might happen over future years. We've done it a couple of times on the project, just adding that bit more capacity if we can get it to work with that one resident who was willing to have the water cross, the private garden. Could we get another in? So I think it is good, but then there is when you're looking at costs. I know when we looked at the project costs, one of the things was, okay, let's slightly scale down that intervention. Let's see if we can get someone, on board first, do it on small scale, and then scale it up. I think that's key.
I was just going to say one of the things about retrofitting is often we're not designing to a particular standard, but we're just trying to get in what we can. So if we're putting a rain garden in the highway, we typically have an overflow so that up to a certain magnitude of event, that'll all be stored or hopefully infiltrated, but then it will start to overflow back into the drainage system where without that rain garden it would have just gone anyway. So in terms of future-proofing, at least there's something there that people can potentially plumb more water into, and then that would deliver more water quality benefits and so on. But from a sort of purely from just a storage hydraulic point of view, it might reduce the actual standard of protection that system is delivering. But still probably not a bad thing.
I would echo exactly that, Ian. I think we're in a fortunate position in the local authority that we, rather than being on the consultant side where we stipulate to you must design for 100-year post-climate change, we don't want anything less. And I guess then we hypocritically sit back and say, well, we'll just achieve what we can in this site. So I can see where that confusion might come about. But I think ultimately we do try and achieve the maximum we can, and in certain instances actually there is capacity available to it, and I think we should be looking in this instance. I think quite often the potential to disconnect downpipes is huge and can have a massive benefit. Quite often that disconnection goes straight into their property, and I guess in an ideal world there'll be lots of people wanting to do their own curbside rain gardens within their own properties. But whether we can actually provide that capacity for every single SUD scheme, I'm not sure. But I can assure you now that when there is the availability of land to be able to undertake it, we will certainly over-design it on the basis of, you know, more the better in that regard. But it's a good question.
Okay, well, I think unless there's any other burning questions, we'll bring that to a close. It's now my opportunity. I've been asked to make some concluding remarks and observations on what's happened, what we've been talking about today. And I really hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have. For me, I think this is, it is just so nice to see so many excellent schemes coming out from within local authorities and the work that Groundwork is doing. I've always believed that we needed to approach retrofitting from a bottom-up sort of perspective, and I think this is just demonstrating loud and clear that in the face of the difficulties that we have with new build, that we can actually make a difference, because the biggest difference that needs to be made is with respect of retrofitting. That is really where our problems are in terms of alleviating the problems that we already have, let alone addressing the problems that are coming in the future with all the development that we do. And I think the point that also has been made is money is available. You know, if you are creative, if you look at who you can partner with, and if you look beyond your own pockets. And it's not just about money, it's about engaging with people, engaging with organisations, engaging with anybody who has an interest, whatever that stakeholder might be or whoever that stakeholder might be. And I think the more people can understand what it is that we're all trying to achieve, the more likely we are to get that positive engagement. And also that we say about partnering. Partnering is not just about money and delivery, it's very much about people. And that's about collaborating as professionals with mutual respect and understanding for what each of us can bring to the equation. And the fact that on any project, it's a variable feast. You know, who needs to lead, who needs to support is very much about the nature of that project and what it's expected to deliver. But partnering is very much about partnering with the end users and the people. I mean, historically, community engagement's been all about going in with new builds and talking to people who already live there about developments that only affect them in the main peripherally because they're not the end users. Whereas this is absolutely about delivering in the hearts of communities. And if we don't engage properly, rather than just inform people about what the intentions are and why we need to do it, then those schemes will never be successful. Which sort of brings you back to what we've been talking about, placemaking. Placemaking, for me, is about creating places for people. And that places for people is about something that has resonance with them in their lifestyle. So it's about understanding the character and the meaning of a place and how the interventions that we create within them can facilitate places that people want to live in and use. They can inspire, they can create awe, they can be comfortable places. And I think, again, we've seen some lovely examples of how these places have responded to the desires and the needs for people, whilst also accommodating them in something that makes the place a more beautiful and attractive place to be, and delivering the outcomes that we need in terms of water management. Amenity, we've talked about amenity, green deserts, meaningless spaces, places that don't have anything for people. And sadly, we're even now seeing some SUDs that are a little bit green desert-like, or ones that might have failed, which are rather brown, muddy desert-like. And we've got to be very careful, I think, in the way that we address these. And perhaps that's about the need to engage with the end users and with those who maintain them to make sure that our vision carries on in perpetuity, I should say. So, one of the things that was said today, normalising SUDs, I really like that. I thought that was great. That's exactly what we need it to be. It needs to be the default thinking. The fact that we need to daylight our water so that we understand it better, we understand about safety, and that we don't fear it, and that we can enjoy it. And so we can make it part of our landscape, and that we can actually, create beauty and delight whilst also doing all these other things that we want to do. So I think we've actually covered a huge amount today, in these presentations. And, I really commend you guys for the work that you're doing. I think it's been absolutely fantastic. And thank you all very much for your contributions this afternoon. Thank you.